right. Podcast today. I'm super excited to have you here. I'm super excited to have all of the rising moms here too, to ask any of their questions and just be a part of our conversation and our call. So I know I was just sharing with them that you and I go way back. It's been a very long time since we've talked, and it's just fun to kind of reconnect a little bit. But thanks so much for hopping on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah. So, okay, we're going to dive in today all about boundaries. It's something we've been talking about a lot inside our group, specifically about boundaries with kids and how we can set up those expectations with our kids and follow through with our kids and just create really great, amazing kids. So, before we do that, just would you mind sharing a little bit about you?
Sure. I am a mom of 3 kids. My oldest is 15. Her name's Delaney. And then the next one is 11. That's Adeline. And then Lincoln is the caboose of this little train. He is 8. I embarked on homeschooling this year. I think COVID gave some courage to maybe it's not as hard as I thought it was. So I'm excited about that. We've been doing that this year. It's been a blast, actually. It's been really fun. I love being with my kids. I'm a working mom as well. So the balance of how to do all that is nothing but a fun challenge for me. I live out on 5 acres with my whole family. I have my parents here as well. So it's really fun because grandma and grandpa are near. And we have about 40 animals. So we have a little mini farm. And we just like being outside and doing life together. And I work for a nonprofit organization called Loving on Purpose, and I'm the family life director there. If you've heard of Danny Silk, that's my dad, and that's who I work for under his ministry. And I've been doing that for about 8 years. I think it happened just after Lincoln was born, somewhere in there. That's usually how I do my timeline, just by child. I don't know about anyone else. But so that's
Yep.
pretty much the highlights of me. I just celebrated our 17th wedding anniversary last weekend, so that was fun. Ben and I our high school sweethearts had never went to high school together. Thank you. We met in the small town of Northern California. He's from Australia, and stayed in contact, got married really young. But it's been one of the hardest things and most rewarding things. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah. It's just fun to hear everybody's stories too. And I know like social media has made it kind of weird because you still feel like you kind of know parts of what's going on in people's lives, but then also distant at the same time. So it's kind of fun to like actually reconnect. So I know a big part of what you do with Loving on Purpose and your guys' ministry in the role of parenting and helping support loving bonds. And so how does boundaries play into that? And what would you describe boundaries as? Because I know when we've been chatting in our group, a lot of people think of boundaries as a really negative thing. And so we've been kind of flipping that a little. How would you describe boundaries, and how does that play into kind of our parenting role?
Yeah, I think of boundaries as really just kind of almost like a protective barrier to something that I find really valuable. And when I think about it in terms of my family or my children, is that, you know, if I want to protect a culture in my home, I have to have a boundary. You know, I wouldn't just let anyone come over and babysit my kids. I would have to, you know, do some vetting. I'd have to make sure that I got a recommendation from somebody. I'd have to make sure that, you know, I've met them or at least had some good context for them before I were to invite them into my home. Not because I think they're an evil person, but because I want to protect something. And what am I trying to protect? My children. So that is an illustration of a boundary, is that I don't just let anyone come in here to influence my world. I am selective. And I think the same thing goes for our children. So what movies they watch, that's the boundary. Why do we not let our, 6-year-old watch an R-rated movie? Well, because we're like, I don't think that's probably the best option for what they could be exposed to. It's not because I am against R-rated movies or, because I've watched them with my husband, but, it's a boundary of what am I trying to protect. So you just have to look at it more as I'm protecting something, and what am I protecting? And this boundary around it is intentional, and it's, you know, like I think a lot in farm terms. So I have these wonderful goats, but I wouldn't just let them roam all over the neighborhood because all sorts of fun things would eat them, right? Well, it's the same thing. Like I have, you know, a boundary in our homes, and every one of my children, they're all different ages, have different boundaries to different things. And so, you know, the 8-year-old has a different boundary with the Switch than the 11-year-old has with movies, or the 15-year-old with what she has access to on the internet. So it's just, it's all about protecting this culture that Ben and I have worked so hard to create. And so more than anything, I think it's such a powerful tool to help communicate and reinforce, we value you, we want to protect you, and we're not withholding, we're just moving you from one pasture to the next when you're ready.
Yeah. Well, and that's a couple of questions that I know that has come up, and I really like that because I think it helps shift it a little bit. Coming from the kids' perspective, one of them is allowed to do something and the other one is not, and that can be really challenging for it within a family. So how do you kind of define when those roles or when those boundaries need to shift and change, and what is appropriate, and like how do you communicate that well so that it goes over well with your kids?
Totally. Yeah, I know. I love the, well, it's not fair that they get to and I can't. I mean, I feel like I've heard that many times in different seasons for things. And, you know, I'll give the example of right now, my son really wants this video game on his Switch, and Ben and I just don't feel comfortable with it. And it's not a bad game. It's lots of our friends that have, that are around his age have it. But we just said, you know what? I'm just not ready to say yes yet because there's something in my heart that feels like it's not okay. And he's like, well, that's not fair. That's not fun. And I'm like, I know. I said, but I'm trying to do a really good job of being your mommy because I'm nobody else's mommy but yours. And then the other thing that will happen is, you know, how come they got to stay up later than I did? That's usually the other one I get, is the one bedtime is different than another. And we have conversations. When you get to this age and you're old enough, then we'll talk about it. I said, but you're not 11 yet. You're still 8. So when we get to 11, we get to have a different conversation. But we're not at 11 yet, are you? Or did you turn 11 overnight? I mean, that's kind of the lighthearted conversation, like it goes. But, you know, again, I know my motivation is I am protecting something, and I'm not going to let your fit or your frustration convince me otherwise, because it's my job to lead this culture, and I have to be okay with that.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and even going backwards a little bit, I know like for us in the group and stuff, I talk a lot about like setting our own priorities and like setting our own family's core values. And so I think kind of what you're talking about here is like, that is the foundation. You have to start there in order to know how to parent effectively, because you have to know what you're trying to protect. Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah.
I always say, you know, if you don't have a goal or
I love it.
vision, it's really hard to get where you're going. You know, a lot of people just live on the cuff. I had an idea to have kids. This is great, but I don't know what I'm doing, because I haven't created clarity to that. And that's a really big part for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So kind of thinking forward, like I know you kind of gave some examples of how you communicate, say that you kind of start doing that, because I know that was a question that came up group, was like, at what age do you start setting those boundaries, and how do you communicate those in a way that really works developmentally and changes over time as they grow?
Yeah, it depends on what boundary exactly you're trying to set. You know, and that varies. You know, as they get older, obviously you work to build more trust, and trust is something that's given. And so we have to be willing to give trust when it's scary, because they're very capable of making a mess. And we have to be able to try again, even when they break trust. So, you know, boundaries starts really honestly way back when they're babies, as much as people don't think it's boundaries. But we don't, I mean, I know with my kids, I was the walking pacifier, fed you whenever you cried, to, oh my gosh, I'm losing my mind, I can't sleep, so I need something different, let's create a routine and a structure. So I've done both of those. But there was a boundary. It's, we're going to wait until this time frame, and then I'm going to feed you, you're not going to die, I have figured this out. And then let's go a little older to where maybe they're 3 years old and we're trying to teach them responsibility of cleaning up their toys. So it would be, hey, I have a snack for you as soon as you put your Play-Doh away in the container. Now there's a boundary right there. The boundary is, I'm trying to teach you how to clean up after yourself. And what I have for you is snack. Now, no one's going to die if you don't get snacks, but I'm trying to teach you the value of cleaning up after yourself. So the boundary simply is, to have this snack, we've got to clean up the Play-Doh. It gets even bigger when they get to 15, or you're trying to introduce technology, which I don't love technology. I mean, it's beautiful. Obviously, here we are all together, but it is also robbing our children of their ability to have real relationships, because you can't have the emotions in text. You can't, and so that's been a fun thing that us parents are having to navigate like never before, is why should they have a cell phone? Why do they need an iPad? Just because everybody else has it. So there's boundaries even with that. Like, and my conversations with my children are, I need to feel safe and protected, that you're going to protect Dad and I's heart with you having an iPad. And if you can't do that, that's no problem. We'll take it away for a season, and let me know why I would be a genius parent for letting you have this back. Now, that opportunity right there is communicating to them that it's not my job to convince me of why you should have this, because I don't really care. But I want you to think about and own the problems that were made, and the violation that happened in our trust, which was breaking of the boundaries. And so again, like that's a much older example than you would maybe face in preschool. But those are it just changes with their growth season, and you just have to lean in of, am I doing this for you because I'm afraid you're going to fail, or is this a good opportunity for you to learn how to build trust by creating different boundaries in our relationship?
And I love like that example that you kind of talked about in terms, and just like that, and talking about the trust, is that the boundary isn't meant to be boundary as the trust fluctuates and changes over time. But I think it's really powerful to kind of look at that. We talked in our group too, is that you're responsible for yourself and not other people, and kind of relieve and not limit of trust and negotiation and communication. And so I think it's just really powerful to look at it from that perspective and not see it as just this like hard fast, like this is what I want. And I liked the way you just played out communication, and that you're putting it in their ball court and kind of giving them that sense of responsibility and that sense of ownership, and not somebody that's going to just push against that boundary and limit to see how far they can push it.
Totally. And I think that's probably where we get a lot of rebellion, is when our children start to feel powerless around us, is they start to no longer feel like they have any say in this life, and that they're just being told what to do, that they have this dictator that's instructing their every move. And so, I always tease, I got this from my dad, but he says the only difference between a toddler and a teenager is body hair. And because they still throw tantrums, they still throw fits, but they crave control. And so when we're able to share this control, and there's still a boundary, which is, for me to take you to your friend's birthday party, the dishes have to get done. And so I'm sorry if you miss it because you didn't do your chore, but I was always going to take you as soon as that happened. And that's not you're an evil mom for not taking your kid to a birthday party. It's we are, joining together as a family and participating and taking care of one another. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine. But the things I do control as a parent is permission, opportunity, and resources. And so if you don't want to take care of that boundary, then my resource of taking you somewhere kind of goes away for this opportunity. And I usually lean in with lots of empathy. I'm so sorry that that was your choice. I know that Michael will forgive you. We still have his gift. Maybe next time you'll have those dishes done. I believe in you. You know, and it's not sarcasm. It really is this empathetic sense of, that was a really hard lesson for you to learn. But I bet when I say I would love to take you to the store or wherever as soon as those dishes are done, wow, that's going to mean something because I followed through with it.
For sure. And so, and I know like so I'm just thinking too, like each of my kids would respond to that very differently. And so one of my children would probably be like, yes, I learned a lesson, this sucks, and move along. And the other one would like think it's the end of the world.
Yes. Which is not uncommon.
Like the world is ending. So how do you kind of navigate and change? And like we even talked a little bit about the differences between kids, even within age, but they're also going to be different, I think, in personality and emotional regulation and things like that too.
Yeah, and I think that this is where my response and my engagement to knowing their love language is plays a big part. So like if that hard boundary was really hard for them to recover from, you know, it's the end of the world, you're the meanest mom on the planet, there's lots of tantrums, you have to be careful not to just engage in that, because that's usually where you get into this battle of, you know, we're either lecturing or disrespect starts to eke out because, you know, no one's having any fun. So, you know, I definitely have one of those. And typically I say, hey, let's connect when you've calmed down, because it's not going to produce anything right now if I keep trying to lean in. And then I reconnect with her when she's at a different state emotionally. And it's usually me climbing in bed with her and be like, hey, you know what? I get it. Do you understand what happened? Do you understand what I need? Do you understand that I love you, that I'm not against you? You know, what do you think we could do differently? So I really start to break it all down for her. I feel like that's usually what my more emotional end of the world, you're the cruelest mommy child. She just needs a little bit more time together to break down what happened. And there's been times where I reference like, hey, remember last time? I'm just letting you know that we're kind of in the same boat. And I haven't really gotten to do very many things twice, if I'm being honest, because, you know, they're really smart kids. And if you follow it through from start to finish, you typically only get one. But every now and then they throw you for a loop and they challenge you. But I think the big thing is your consistency in that. And then knowing your child and knowing how to reconnect, because connection is where we get influence in our kids' hearts. So connection really is the number one thing I would say in any boundary or anything that we're asking of them. If I don't have connection, I want to work on that first.
Yeah, for sure. As we're kind of getting closer to the end, if anybody wants to throw in any questions in the chat, we can do that. Or if you want to pop off, just raise your hand or things like that. Is there anything that you feel like we've kind of not touched on today, Brittney?
You know, I feel like we touched on a lot of different things. I talked about a lot of different tools. So I just think that if you're interested in learning more, you should go to Loving on Purpose, because it was so many different little popcorn pieces. But I think if I could give two big highlights in introducing boundaries, is I would say consistency is a big thing, and connection. And working on those two things are gonna make you more successful than if you don't have them. Again, there's only so much time to go through all of those, but I think if boundaries feels hard for you, it's most likely going to feel hard for you in all areas. It's probably not just your kids; it's probably all areas of life.
Yeah.
And I, you know, like my husband is awesome, and boundaries is really hard for him because he's a very different personality than I am. I'm very blunt. I'm very straightforward. I don't really like pushback. I'm usually the one pushing. So it's easy for me to set boundaries. But him, he's a bit more like, he's very aware of other people. He's very relationally driven. he's very aware of the emotional state in the room. And so to have a hard boundary feels harsh. And so he's had to work through actually how valuable boundaries are and how much they increase the intimacy in the relationships. So if that's something that you feel like is going on, I would just keep pursuing it, because it's most likely not in just your family. It's probably in all different aspects, and it will make you such just a healthier person if you can tackle boundaries, for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And I think boundaries, people always just assume boundaries are this like really restrictive or setting limits or whatever. But, you know, like you said, we've talked a lot about this month is that boundaries are kind of defining what matters to you and then learning how to communicate those with other people. And so it really gives you the freedom to pay attention and focus on those things that matter the most to you, when you can say no to the things that don't really matter, or the things that aren't really what you want to do, or not really investing into your relationships or whatever it is. So, and when you just shift that gears and see like, hey, setting this boundary is going to give me more intimacy, setting this, it's going to help with my connection, it's going to help with everything, you know, and just looking at it that way, I think that can be really helpful.
Yeah. It gives your yes and no a lot of power.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Okay. Any other last little wrap up questions that anybody has for Brittney? Are we good? I was just noticing all of the people except for one are all in the UK. You guys, the UK folks showed up today.
Well, that's awesome.
I know. All right. Well, Brittney, thank you so much for hopping on today. It was such a great opportunity to kind of learn a little bit more. I know that boundaries is one of those things that can be really challenging for parents. And I know it comes up in our group a lot, is how do I say, you know, it means a no. And so how do you communicate that boundary? And I think you did a really beautiful job in it, an empathetic sort of way, so that it's not just a no, you can't do this. There's a reason behind it, and you're communicating those values and communicating those feelings and those reasons. And I think that that's where a lot of that power comes to in those boundaries, is when your kids can understand what it's set for and why it's there, and can kind of share in that. And maybe they don't love it and enjoy them all the time, but they understand the value behind it, you know. And like, looking back, I know that this was partly the way your dad raised you. And so now looking back, you probably are like, I'm so thankful that my dad did XYZ in some ways. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So I know you already mentioned Loving on Purpose, but where can people follow you, connect with you, learn more about what you guys have going on, all of that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so lovingonpurpose.com is kind of the hub for everything. I do a lot of coaching, one-on-one with people, families, and different church organizations. So that's in the coaching section. We have something called Life Academy, which is usually there are 8 videos, about 20 minutes each, with PDFs and kind of a workbook thing. I teach the parenting one, and there's a couple other ones on there around parenting. I have a podcast as well called Coffee, Kids, and Crazy. That's just kind of how I feel like my life normally goes. So I thought it was an appropriate title. And Brittney Serpell on Instagram is where I am most of the time. So that's a good way to find me there. I usually ask or answer questions through that, or I'll direct you to the coaching if I think that we need more than just back and forth through Instagram messaging. So, but that's where you'd find all of our stuff.
All right. Well, thank you for hopping on. It was such a pleasure, and we should kind of connect a little bit more.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to kind of see how things have changed in the last 25 years. But I thank you so much for hopping on. It's amazing what you're doing. And I know that so many of the women in here are feeling really grateful and thankful that you have showed up today and participated and shared your knowledge. So thank you much.
Yes, thank you again for having me. It was very fun.